Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to another episode of the Make Saints podcast. I'm Drew Downs, and I want to talk about abuse and the culture war. Now, unless you're living under a rock, as they say, you are familiar with the language of the culture war. This phrase, which is often uttered in the media and by conservative evangelicals, is done with a lens toward protection and toward describing our general culture as at war with people of faith. It's crazy that this is acceptable in public, that media agencies buy into this. It's absolutely bonkers. And it's bonkers that the mainline, that Catholic and Orthodox churches, charismatic even, and non-denominational churches all buy into this rhetoric that all comes from the evangelical world. It was created in the evangelical world, and if for no other reason, that the name itself implies that evangelicals have gone to war with their culture. Just unfathomable that we would accept that. But the second half of this is that it is rhetoric that's targeted directly at the main line in the church and anyone who does not fit within what they used to say back. It was sort of developed back at the end of the 19th century. The fundamentalists, that what the fundamentalists believed could speak for all of Christianity. And this language, this depiction of the culture war as something inherent, this something that just is there, has left people bitter, pained, and traumatized. And those of us who have been subjected to this abusive language without a media that is up to telling the truth have had to deal with this ourselves. Now, I was thinking about this. There's this in one of the stories in the Emerged podcast that came out this past spring. They were recalling in the episode on backlash. They were talking about these interviews that many leaders in the emerging church movement did years ago, when people were starting to discover about the emerging church. And so they would go on like, a national broadcast, and they would bring on an evangelical church leader, like a John Piper or a MacArthur. And they would have them on, and then they would have next to them a Doug Pagitt. And they would frame it as old church versus new, as traditional versus this contemporary, and it would set up as a debate between opposites, and then you would have John Piper calling this other person a heretic, and it doesn't represent any of that, and the people on the screen, the hosts, the people doing this would sort of go along with this as a debate between two sides. And then when the camera was off, you actually had people talking to Doug Pagitt because they actually wanted to hear more about a church that wasn't like that vision that they were treating as traditional. And in part because they could say, that guy looks crazy on the screen, that guy looks crazy. And we are at home saying that guy looks crazy. But what is happening? The media, in all of its forms, our news media, our journalists, the people we trust, are presenting that as tradition. Now, it's deeply problematic that we continue to work with this dynamic of left-right, traditional versus contemporary. Now, traditional is a word that Phyllis Tickle said that people only ever use the word traditional to describe something that's less than 100 years old. Because if it's older than that, we all know it's traditional. You don't have to say it. The implication, of course, is that we use the word traditional to describe something new and ascribe age to it and pretend like we've always done it. And so that's how you can have an evangelical, a new manifestation of Christianity on the world stage and pretend like they can speak for all of tradition. And then have the traditions that world demonizes and abuses with words of disgrace everywhere. And we get written out of that equation. It is deeply problematic. This is another version of this word that we hear used the same way. There's another one, biblical. And I always like to think whenever people talk about biblical, something being biblical or biblical marriage, for instance, or traditional marriage, I often think, you mean like Solomon with his 700 wives and 300 concubines? That's where my mind goes. Or do you want to go to the biblical where he became a gun runner and demonized, essentially disgraced the people of Israel for the next 300 years? They couldn't have a king that wasn't evil. Yeah, that's biblical. That's biblical too. This belief that it exists, that the church exists in a left-right paradigm, for instance, or that there's this growing conservatism in the United States, or the demise of the main line. These sort of talking points, these things that are offered and peppered out into the world by the evangelical church to establish its strength and to demonize its opponent in the world, and then parroted by the media, and then parroted within our churches and becomes internalized as the way we see ourselves. And so all of our debates, all of our conversations within the church can turn into these self-harm sessions in which we continuously say we're not good enough, we're not strong enough, that they are doing something right. When what it is it's our own trauma response. When others cherry pick items out of the world and claim to speak for all of us. It is abusive rhetoric. The language of the culture war is abuse. It isn't truth. It isn't facts. It's an argument. And it's an argument that's pushed out from the evangelical world to control all of Christianity, to make all other adherents or apostate, orthodox or heretics. That's how they're leveling it, and they just so happen to be the ones who get to decide. And every journalist over the last 40 years, that has offered this language, this existence, this naturally occurring phenomenon, apparently, as if it were fact. Every mainline Protestant who accepts this as the terms of the debate is failing to live into the grace of our work and our witness to the world, to the truth, to the Word made flesh, to the resurrection, to every ridiculous thing we believe. We're not living into it when we live into their vision of us. We have neighbors. They are our neighbors. They aren't our masters. The culture war itself is language of abuse and exploitation, which means that, my friends, is sin. And the church, the media, and even many of us who are its victims have repeated that abuse, strangled our own witness, and we must all repent of it, confess, and be changed by grace to live and speak the truth. That God is revealed in all true visions of love, in the freedom that comes to those who are enslaved by rhetoric, sexual repression, laws that prevent our full expression of joy, laughing, singing, and feasting in the grace of God. That is our witness. That at all tables that welcome with hands that feed and hearts of love, neighbors, immigrants, strangers, and we name them all friends. That, my friends, is witness. That, my friends, is grace. And that is our work. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time.